good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be joining us from, and thank you for being with us. We are very glad to have you here for this lecture on Christian nationalism. And I am so pleased to have a friend and a colleague who has done so much work on this topic in Ghana. The person of Professor Jeffery Haynes. And when we thought about a topic, his name automatically came to mind, and I'm like, okay, I know this guy is super busy, so I don't even know whether he's going to be available for this, but I would nevertheless take my chances and see. So I dropped him an email, and he graciously replied so swiftly and so positively that I was so delighted. So, Jeff, thank you so much for making time for this lecture. And I am also very glad that my brother, I don't know whether he's joined yet, Professor Sunday Agang, from all the way from the Middle Belt of Nigeria. He has also done quite a lot of work on public theology. And I thought it would be good to have him give a perspective, not just as a direct response to the lecture, but to also bring in some Nigerian and regional, West African regional perspective to the topic. So I want to welcome all of you, and I want to appeal to you that please, if you can mute your mics, so that there will be no interruptions unless you are speaking. We're going to have a moderator who will moderate this. She will introduce the speakers and moderate the session. So the speakers will Yes. Sorry, I got unmuted.
Hello.
What is happening?
Hello.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah.
Okay.
For some reason, I was. Yeah.
All right.
Yes. So I'm going to introduce to you the moderator who will take care of our session this afternoon.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yeah, thank you. We have some heavy downpour here, and we have some challenges. But we sorted it out. So I will introduce the moderator in the person of Abirat Zakaria. Miss Zakaria is assistant here at the Sana Institute. Is also an assistant to me. I can see my brother.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Prof. So I will have her. She will do the introductions of the speakers as she will moderate the session. Prof. Haynes will speak for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. And Prof. Agang will also speak for about 25, 30 minutes. So altogether about an hour, and then we can have time for interactions. So
Okay.
I will hand over to the moderator, Ms. Abirat Zakaria.
Many thanks to you all. Good afternoon. We're honored to have Prof. Jeffery Haynes, who is the Emeritus Professor of Politics at the London Metropolitan University in UK, the co-editor-in-chief of the international peer-reviewed journal Democratization, and series editor of a book series and Routledge Studies in Religion and Politics, which has published over 50 books. He received the International Studies Association for Religion and the International Relations Section's Distinguished Scholar Award in 2016. Prof. Haynes first visited Ghana in 1985, researching for a PhD titled Rawlings and the Politics of Development Policy in Ghana, 1979 to 1986. He successfully completed his PhD in 1988. His PhD is the basis of a recent research monograph, Revolution and Democracy in Ghana, The Politics of Jerry John Rawlings, published by Routledge in UK in 2023. Prof. Haynes is a frequent visitor to Ghana for research purposes, and he's written on politics, the politics column for both Daily Graphic and Daily Statesman newspapers. Prof. Haynes is the author or editor of more than 65 books, the most recent being Christian Nationalism and Democracy in Ghana, which was published by Routledge in 2025. He also has to his credit the Routledge Handbook of Politics and Religion in Contemporary USA, 2025, the Routledge Handbook of Religion and Politics, 3rd edition, in 2023. So, ladies and gentlemen, using your virtual applause, kindly welcome Prof. Jeffery Haynes, who is joining us today to give us a presentation on Christian nationalism in Ghana, implications for democracy and Christian-Muslim relations. Thank you, Prof. Haynes. You have the floor now. Prof. Haynes, if you can hear me, you have the floor now.
Okay, thanks very much.
I think you're muted.
No, yes. I'm unmuted.
Yes, we can hear you now.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much for the extremely warm and fulsome welcome from Dr. Azuma and from you, Abira. Thank you so much. I have to say I'm very delighted to be asked to do this lecture. This is a very prestigious lecture series in my view, and I was delighted to get the email from Dr. Zuma, who I have met and I know fairly well. And I'm also delighted to talk on the topic of Christian nationalism, democracy, and interfaith relations in Ghana. I'm hoping that I can share my screen.
Okay, I'm sharing from my side.
Okay, so would you be kind enough then to put the
yes, he can.
PowerPoint up front, as it were?
Yes.
Thank
so
you.
I can help portrait.
And I'll just talk to that to the PowerPoint, I think. Just while the PowerPoint's going up, as Abiret said, I first was in Ghana 40 years ago, and so I have a fairly long and I like to think intimate relationship with the country. My initial research interest in Ghana was on during the PNDC years from the mid 1980s, and more recently I've become interested in religion and politics in Ghana, and I've now written a book entitled Christian Nationalism and Democracy in Ghana. When the I can't see the PowerPoint, Abirat. Can you put it up there, do you think?
Prof, I think you can share it from your end, if that's fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
let me share it from my end then.
You can share.
I just have to find the I always have a problem. I always have a problem
Okay, and let me okay.
finding the PowerPoint. I have it on my desktop, but I can't easily find it. No, I'm not seeing it on my screen. Let me just see if I can do it a different way. Sorry about this, everybody. See if I can do it a different way. Can you now see the PowerPoint?
It's not yet showing. Okay, I think it's. Can you see it, bro?
No, I still can't see it, I'm afraid. I had it up on my screen here, but I can't see it on the screen for the Zoom. Let me try again. Sorry about this, everybody. Aha, okay. So thank you. So that would imply, Abirat, that I will ask you to move the slides on. Is that correct?
Yes, Prof.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, well, sorry about that technical hitch, everybody. It's my own fault. I'm just not particularly afraid with this. Okay, so this is my most recent book on Ghana, Christian Nationalism and Democracy in Ghana. It was published last year in the Routledge Studies on Religion in Africa and the Diaspora series. It's been out for about a year now. The unfortunate thing is that it's not freely available in Ghana at an affordable price. I had long discussions with the publisher. They claimed they would put the book, make the book available in Ghana at an affordable price. They don't seem to have done that. There will be a paperback edition out soon, and there is an ebook edition out. But sadly, at the moment, the original hardback is not freely available in Ghana at a price that Ghanaians would want to pay. So apologies for that. All right, so this is the book. Could you give me the next slide, please? Okay, so the 228 pages. This is the details on the screen really are for those interested in the book to have a look at the book. And there's a 37-page preview, which basically is the first couple of chapters. So if the Institute would be kind enough to circulate these PowerPoint slides later on, you can, if you wish to, access the book's webpage, and if you wish to read 7-page preview, you'll be very welcome to. Okay, so the book's based on six research visits to Ghana over a 2-year period between July 2022 and November 2024. So it's fairly current. It's those visits enable me to interview many knowledgeable people in Ghana, including Dr. Azuma, I'm delighted to say. And the book overall draws from around 50+ personal interviews with knowledgeable people, mainly Ghanaians, either on the general topic of regional politics or the issue of Christian nationalism in politics specifically. Without the interviewees' gracious willingness to spare their time for me, the book would have been impossible to do. So the interviews were absolutely fundamental to the book. The book includes a full list of interviewees at the end. Interviews were semi-structured, lasting between 30 and 60 minutes. And what that basically means is that there will be a small list of questions which I would go through, and then discussions would branch out and expand depending on the issues which appeared to become of most importance during the discussion. I followed up on the interviews with many of the interviewees via email, and particularly WhatsApp and occasionally telephone during the 2022-25 period. So the result was the book, which came out in, I think, July last year. Okay, let me first define some of the terms I'm using. The key one really in the book is Christian nationalism. Now, many of you will be aware of the term, but you'll also be aware that the term Christian nationalism is not something which has a universal understanding or meaning. It differs from place to place, in other words. I want to refer to the work of the Singaporean political scientist Nilai Sayar, who's written about Christian nationalism in a kind of a global context. And according to Sayar, Christian nationalism is a global problem that has been surging in regions as diverse as South America, Europe, and Africa. It's a political ideology and cultural framework advocating for the fusion of a particular form of Christianity and a country's civic life and political institutions, and for a privileged place for Christianity in the public realm. So it highlights Christianity as an ideology which seeks particular political goals. And according to Sayar, Christian nationalism is a danger to democracy. And he asserts that when it is entrenched in national politics, the quality of democracy is substantially degraded. So for him, he published an article in the Review of Faith and International Affairs in 2024, which is this global survey where this definition of Christian nationalism was presented. Give me the next slide, thank you. Turning to Africa in particular, Elizabeth Sperber and Erin Hearn, who are US academics, argue that Christian nationalism in sub-Saharan Africa has significant implications for democratization, ethnic politics, and civil society in the region. So in a way, they are endorsing what Sayar has said, that Christian nationalism is perceived by these particular scholars to be a danger to democracy. Now, I haven't quoted any Ghanaian scholars on Christian nationalism in the book, largely because, to my surprise, no Ghanaian scholars had, to my knowledge, written substantively about Christian nationalism. And one of the key things that I found during the research for the book and during the interviews in particular was that very few knowledgeable Ghanaians had much of an idea about what Christian nationalism was and how it was impacting upon their country's politics. So in some ways, the book is a groundbreaking book because it identifies the issue which until now has not really been substantially assessed within Ghana itself. And why I think this is important is that Ghana is one of the most stable, long-running, enduring democracies in sub-Saharan Africa. 35 years since the return to democracy after the PNDC years and the lengthy period of military-based rule. And I work on the premise that Christian nationalism is an ideology which can indeed threaten Ghana's democracy in various ways. I don't make the claim that at the moment Christian nationalism is a threat to Ghana's democratic continuity. I don't make that claim in the book more generally, but I do make the claim that Christian nationalism in Ghana is impacting upon specific aspects of democracy, which I shall go into in a moment. Christian nationalists are said to prioritize power and control over others, supporting political candidates who promise to protect or restore the hegemony of Christianity, regardless of these politicians' commitment to democratic norms and institutions. The implication is that for Christian nationalists, upholding and imposing what I'm calling Christian values may be more important than observing democratic norms. Let me be clear. The Christian nationalists that I have spoken to and I referred to are not anti-democracy per se. No one that I spoke to wished to see an alternative political system. No one wished to see one-party rule, no-party rule, military rule, or some other form of autocracy in Ghana. The point, however, is that the nature of democracy is changed, or would be changed, according to a Christian nationalist outlook, to privilege Christians in positions of power in politics, society, and the economy. And as you will no doubt know, Ghana is a country of great religious pluralism, albeit 70% of Ghanaians are Christians. That implies, of course, that 30% are not. And non-Christians in Ghana amount to Muslims, 20%, followers of traditional religions, 3 to 5%, followers of other religions, about 5%, and very few secular Ghanaians. Very few Ghanaians would admit to being non-religious. So really, what I'm suggesting is that Christian nationalism is an attempt to develop Ghana's polity in relation to a specific Christianized worldview. And to do this would not be to undermine democracy per se, but it would be to enable Christian nationalists to enjoy positions of power, to enable them to take the country in a direction which privileges Christian nationalist views. Now, it's not just in Ghana. I mean, you will, of course, have heard of or read about or seen Christian nationalism in the United States, and as I shall explain, there are some links between Christian nationalism in the US and in Ghana and in Africa more generally. So not only Ghana but also Zambia and Nigeria have been characterized by scholars as countries where Christian nationalism is a significant religious and political ideology. So the focus of the book is on the impact of Christian nationalism on democracy and interfaith relations in Ghana, arguing that proponents of a specific Christian worldview seek to remake the country according to their values and beliefs. In Ghana, prominent Christian nationalists, many of whom were encouraged by sections of the US Christian right, cultivate political influence with powerful political elites. Cross-party, this is not a partisan issue, this is across the political landscape, including the two major parties, NPP and NDC. And Christian nationalists have developed a high media profile to promote their views with the intention of increasing the numbers of followers. So the book makes this general argument about Christian nationalism and its growing significance in Ghana's polity, and it illustrates that or provides evidence for that claim in relation to three specific issues. So 3 of the chapters of the book focus upon 3 specific issues, which I argue are informed by Christian nationalism. The first one is what I might call the putative national cathedral now, which was, as you will probably know, put forward a decade ago by the then President Akufo-Addo as a symbol of national unity and social cohesion. But I argue in the book that the problem with that is that the National Cathedral was seen by many Ghanaians as privileging the Christian faith over other faiths. And this was seen by many critics as an effort to focus the idea of the nation in Ghana with Christianity. Now, I know that it looks like the National Cathedral has been abandoned or at least stalled, so it's not now the case that the National Cathedral is proceeding as a symbol of Christian nationalism. Then there are, secondly, anti-Muslim pronouncements threatening interfaith harmony, and I'll say a bit more about that later on. Part of the worldview of Christian nationalism is extensive proselytization of Christianity, including to what they refer to as the unreached peoples, including Muslims. And this can create or certainly inform Muslim suspicions of the motivations of Christians in Ghana, because one of the key issues about religious pluralism in Ghana is that the faiths live in harmony and have lived in harmony for a very long time. And there's a potential, I suggest in the book, that Christian nationalism can undermine that harmony and cause tensions, especially with the Muslim community. And then thirdly, the book focuses upon attacks on Ghana's LGBTQ plus community, which I recognize is not only coming from Christian nationalism, but from a wider swathe of Ghanaian society. So overall, the book argues that Christian nationalism is a specific threat to Ghana's 3-decade-long liberal democracy. And I stress the word liberal here because if we think of democracy as simply turning up to vote every 4 years via the ballot box in a free and fair competition, then Christian nationalism does not affect that particular dimension of democracy. But I'm suggesting it affects the liberal dimensions, especially in relation to human rights and religious pluralism. And I think that Christian nationalism can potentially undermine the constitutional position of Ghanaians, especially those who would not see themselves as Christian nationalism. Okay, next slide, thank you. So the book addresses 3 main issues in its summary. Christian nationalism's impact on Ghana's liberal democracy, especially in relation to human rights, interactions between Ghana's Christian nationalists and elements of the American Christian right, and thirdly, Christian nationalism's impact on Christian-Muslim relations. Well, one of the dangers that Nile Seya refers to, he's the scholar I mentioned right at the beginning, is the globalization of Christian nationalism, whereby Christian nationalist ideas, worldviews, and ideologies are transmitted from country to country. And the rise and growing prominence of Christian nationalism in Ghana and elsewhere in Africa is due to a considerable extent to the Christian right in America. Christian right is a transnational force which seeks to spread its own ideas to the rest of the world, and it's finding particularly fertile ground, it seems to me, in some African countries, including Ghana. I can say more about that in the Q&A if people would like me to. So the argument is that over time, Christian nationalism has been growing in political prominence in Ghana, impacting on Ghana's liberal democracy, human rights, and interfaith relations, largely via the cultivation of links with prominent, powerful politicians, some of whom have adopted the ideas and focus of Christian nationalism. This was particularly the case during the last presidency. It's less apparent now during the current presidency. So the book has two objectives: to examine Christian nationalism's political and religious significance in Ghana and assess its impact on the country's liberal democracy, which I'd like to stress once again is in a very unusual country in Africa. Africa's 54 countries, a mere handful, maybe 10%, could claim to be a functioning liberal democracy, to some extent liberal democracy, certainly a functioning electoral democracy. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so the three examples: the putative national cathedral, symbol of national unity and social cohesion. That's in inverted commas because that's how the President Akufo-Addo, referred to the National Cathedral. You will know perhaps that the cathedral was mooted as Akufo-Addo's personal promise to God for winning the 2016 presidential election. And you'll also know, of course, that the National Cathedral has become a focus of controversy over the years, largely due to large sums, tens of millions of dollars, committed, some would say illegally, to the cathedral's construction, which of course didn't get very far. And so now there are ongoing investigations about the legality of the of the National Cathedral. But the reason that I focus upon it in the book is not so much of the controversy over its construction and its financing, but rather the way in which it was suggested, it was mooted, it was claimed to be an example of national unity and social cohesion, which seemed to me to be completely overlooking the fact that not all Ghanaians are Christians, and certainly not all Ghanaian Christians believe that the cathedral was a good idea. Not only because of the fact that non-Christians would not feel part of that project, but also because of the financial implications for the country at a time of high unemployment and economic disappointments. So in the book, I argue that Christian nationalism in relation to the cathedral undermines religious pluralism by lionizing Christianity as a national focus, or as a nationalist focus, while undermining non-Christian Ghanaians in the process. Secondly, there's the zealous proselytization of Christian nationalists who believe that Ghana is a country. They believe it implicitly or explicitly, depending on who you talk to and how they respond, that Ghana is a country which really should be 100% Christian. That would be God's will. That would be the most suitable outcome of proselytization. And as I mentioned earlier, this can conflict with non-Christians who may see themselves as targets of this proselytization. Certainly during my interviews, and I spoke to a fair number of prominent Muslims, there was some unease that the Christian nationalism expressed in zealous proselytization by locals in, for example, the Ghana Evangelism Committee, aided and abetted by US evangelicals, was threatening their position, which hitherto had been one of mutual tolerance and coexistence. So that too, I'm arguing, undermines religious pluralism, one of the key constitutional aspects of the return to democracy in 1992. And thirdly, the prolonged attempts to criminalize further the LGBTQ plus community undermines the human rights of sexual minorities. Christian nationalism are not alone in this, but they are prominent in the, if you like, anti-LGBTQ plus efforts. So overall, the book argues that Christian nationalism is a specific threat to Ghana's 3-decade-long liberal democracy, as it undermines constitutional equality and human rights of some Ghanaians in pursuit of what I refer to as a Christianized polity. Christian nationalism then undermines Ghana's liberal democracy by eroding the secular constitution. We sometimes forget that Ghana is a highly religious country, but it has a secular constitution. And what I mean by that is not that Ghana is a secular country, that is, not that Ghana is a country where religion isn't important. I know very well that for most Ghanaians, religion is highly important. But Ghana is referred to as a secular country because it privileges the rights of all religions equally. So it doesn't matter if you're a religion, if you're a Buddhist with 1%, Hindus with 2%, or Christians with 70%. Under the law, all religions are treated equally according to the 1992 Constitution. And so that's what I'm referring to when I say that Christian nationalism undermines Ghana's liberal democracy by eroding the secular constitution, marginalizing or seeking to marginalize religious minorities and threatening some Ghanaians' fundamental human rights, driven by elite alliances with the American Christian right. And the aim is to reshape state policy based on Christian conservative religion morality. So Christian conservative religious morality is an ideology driving Christian nationalism. So while Ghana is constitutionally a secular state, Christian nationalists advocate what I'm calling a soft theocracy. That is, integrating Christian rhetoric into governance, e.g. during presidential campaigns and national prayer events. And this, I'm arguing, marginalizes Muslims and practitioners of traditional African religions. Next slide, please. So, on the specific issue of Christian-Muslim relations, now you will know, I hope, that Ghana has a very long and celebrated history of interfaith tolerance. You will also know, of course, that many African countries cannot claim this, because Ghana stands out as something of a beacon in West Africa and in Africa more widely, I think, as a country where religious pluralism is both celebrated and perpetuated by Ghanaians generally, by those in power and those not in power. There's a great deal of respect for other religions in Ghana, which is not necessarily the case throughout Africa. So while Ghana has long been celebrated for its grassroots religious tolerance and peaceful Christian-Muslim coexistence, the rise of well-funded, politically active Christian nationalism threatens to replace this inclusivity with religious majoritarianism, which would highlight and expand the role of Christianity in the public realm. So Christian nationalism undermines interfaith relations in Ghana by promoting what's called a dominionist worldview that frames non-Christian belief systems, such as Islam and African traditional religions, as false religions or forces of darkness, keeping the nation from prosperity and well-being. And this ideology, I suggest, strains Ghana's historical interfaith harmony, including, perhaps especially, that of Christian-Muslim relations. Next slide, please. So, I want to just conclude with a stark warning, really, that while religion has always played and does continue to play a vital, positive role in the daily lives of millions of Ghanaians, the political weaponization, as I see it, of faith via Christian nationalism is inherently incompatible with a healthy, inclusive democracy. So my claim then is that the the stronger Christian nationalism gets, the more threats there are to the continuity of Ghana's democracy. And one thing is clear, that even though faith in democracy in Ghana is declining, it's still overwhelmingly the choice of the majority of Ghanaians. So if that democratic continuity is threatened by Christian nationalism, this is bad news for the country's long-term well-being, prosperity, tolerance, peace, and harmony. So if left unchecked, I suggest, the ideology of Christian nationalism risks dismantling Ghana's hard-won reputation as one of Africa's most stable and free democratic societies. And I'll stop there, and thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Prof. Haynes, for that deep insights into the topic of Christian nationalism in Ghana. I'm sure beyond this lecture, we can all reflect on your presentation. I'll just give the opportunity to Prof. Sunday Agang to respond, but before then, I'd like to give us a brief introduction of our respondent. So Reverend Prof. Sunday Agang is a Nigerian theologian, an ethicist, public intellectual, and a researcher. He's also an ecclesiastical leader who has contributed greatly to contemporary African Christian theology, ethics, and faith-based social engagements. He has over 4 decades experience in pastoral, academic, administrative, and public service. And he's also emerged as one of Africa's leading voices in Christian ethics. Prof. Agang previously served as the provost of Ekwa Theological Seminary, Kagoro, where he provided visionary leadership that strengthened academic excellence. He's currently a research fellow in the Department of Systematic Theology and Ecclesiology at the Faculty of Theology at Stellenbosch University. And he's held this position since 2018. Prof. Agang also serves as the executive director of Optima Center for Exploration and Learning, which is a research and learning hub dedicated to advancing theological scholarship, public engagement, leadership, and transformative research initiatives. Prof. Agang, if you're ready, I'll give you the opportunity to respond in 20 minutes, after which we'll just give the floor to our participants who have questions. You can also drop your questions in the chat box, and we can get our speakers to respond to that. Thank you.
Thank you, Abira, for that introduction. And thank you, brother Professor Azuma, who has invited me to be part of this lecture today. I must say that to give a response to a whole book, not just a paper, is a huge job. But because the topic is such an important topic for us, which Africa must listen to, I want to take the time to express and begin by expressing a deep appreciation to Prof. Haynes for this insightful book, research that you have done on Christian nationalism and democracy in Ghana. Few contemporary scholars have contributed more significantly to our understanding of the relationship between religion, politics, democratization, and public life in Africa than Haynes has done. Your scholarship has consistently illuminated both the opportunities and the dangers that emerge when religion identity intersects with political power. Your book arrive at a very crucial time in the history of Africa. We are at the time in Africa where democracies continue to struggle with corruption, insecurity, exclusion, ethnic tensions, religious competition, weak institutions, and declining public trust, in spite of the fact that across the continent, Christianity continues to experience extraordinary growth. So what is really the problem? In my response to your paper, I have these central questions that I believe we need to face. 4 central questions that can be raised are: 1, what is the proper relationship between Christianity and the state? 2, can a Christian majority nation remain genuinely democratic? 3, at what point does Christian influence become Christian nationalism? And 4, how can religious convictions enrich public life without undermining equal citizenship? These are questions particularly relevant for Ghana and Nigeria. My response will actually be based on comparing Ghana and Nigeria, which are 2 neighboring West African nations that share similar colonial histories and strong religious identities, but have experienced different democratic trajectories. My purpose is not to challenge Professor Haynes' analysis. Rather, I seek to extend the conversation through the lens of Nigeria's experience and African public theology. There are 4 central arguments in my response. 4 central arguments. First, Christian nationalism must be distinguished from Christian participation in public life. The mere presence of Christian in politics, public institutions, civil society, or national debates does not constitute Christian nationalism. Christians, like all citizens, have both the right and responsibility to contribute to the common good in a nation. The critical question is not whether Christians participate in public life, but whether they seek: 1, democratic service, or 2, religious privilege and political domination. Christian participation becomes problematic only when it seeks to secure special status for one religious community at the expense of others. The second argument: Nigeria's challenge cannot be explained by Christian nationalism alone. Professor Haynes focuses on Christian nationalism in Ghana. Nigeria presents a more complex reality. The complex reality we have in Nigeria is that you will not talk about Christian nationalism, rather you will talk about religious nationalism in Nigeria, which is simultaneously Christian involved, Muslims involved, ethnic, regional, and political. Religion intersects with ethnicity in Nigeria, regional identity, political patronage, economic competition, and access to state resources. As a result, in Nigeria, political conflicts are rarely religious alone. Questions about political appointments, resource distribution, security, and representation are often interpreted through religious lenses. Thus, the deeper Nigerian problem is not Christian nationalism alone, but the politicization of religious identity. The third argument is the deeper crisis is the erosion of human dignity or recognition of human dignity. That is to say that beneath Christian nationalism in Ghana and religious nationalism in Nigeria lies a more fundamental crisis: the loss of human dignity as the moral foundation of public life. The biblical doctrine of the Imago Dei teaches that every human being is created in the image of God. Human dignity, therefore, precedes religion. It precedes ethnicity. It precedes nationality. It precedes race. It precedes gender. It precedes class. And it precedes political affiliation. If every human being bears God's image, no citizen is more human than another. No tribe is superior to another. No religion confers greater dignity than another. Yet African politics frequently operates according opposite assumptions. People are often valued according to their religion, according to their ethnicity, according to their region, according to their political affiliation, or according to their economic status in society. And as a result of this kind of perspective and thinking, this foils corruption, it foils exclusion, it foils discrimination, it foils insecurity, it foils violent conflict, extremism, and institutional injustice. So the democratic challenges facing both Ghana and Nigeria are therefore not merely political crises. They are fundamentally crises of human dignity. The fourth argument that I have as a response to this book is the fact that Africa's democratic future depends on depends on recovering human dignity. The future, that is to say that the future of democracy in Africa will not be secured through religious dominance. It will be secured rather through the recognition of each citizen's human dignity, constitutional democracy, equal citizen, freedom of religion or belief, the rule of law and justice. So human dignity, in a sense, provides a common ground for all of us. It provides a common ground for Christians, for Muslims, for adherents of African traditional religion, and for secular citizens. So a democratic order rooted in human dignity recognizes that every citizen deserves equal protection. Every citizen deserves equal opportunity. Every citizen deserves freedom of religion. Every citizen deserves equal participation in public life. Such a vision provides national unity without demanding religious uniformity. These are the four arguments that I propose as a response to the book. But let me also come from the point of view of African public theology, which is one of the solutions we believe that Africa needs today. At this point, African public theology offers an important contribution. African public theology asks different questions. Its primary concern is not should Christians influence society. Rather, it asks, how should Christians influence society? African public theology argues that Africa's greatest challenge is not merely institutional failure. It is a crisis of character. Corruption, injustice, violence, extremism, poor governance are symptoms of a deeper moral failures. Consequently, African public theology emphasizes the formation of citizens whose public engagement is shaped by Christ-like character. Drawing from Colossians chapter 3, verse 12 to 14, it calls Christians to embody love, justice, compassion, honesty, integrity, humility, truthfulness, trustworthiness, and respect for human dignity. These are not merely private virtues. They are public virtues intended to shape politics, to shape business, to shape education, to shape governance, to shape law, to shape media, to shape civil society, to shape technology. When nationalism seeks power, African public seeks service. Where nationalism privileges one group, African public theology promotes the flourishing of all. Where nationalism divides society into insiders and outsiders, African public theology affirms that all people bear God's image. So in conclusion, Professor Haynes has provided an important warning. The Ghanaian experience demonstrates that a Christian majority nation can maintain democratic pluralism while simultaneously facing the temptation to equate Christian identity with national identity. The Nigerian experience adds another equal important lesson. The greatest threat to democracy may not be Christian nationalism alone. Rather, it is a broader tendency to organize public life around competing religious, ethnic, regional, and political identities instead of our shared humanity. The future of democracy in Ghana, in Nigeria, and in Africa more broadly depends on whether we learn to see one another first as human beings endowed with God-given dignity, and only secondarily as members of particular religious, ethnic, or political communities. From an African public theology perspective, the most powerful Christian contribution to public life is not merely public argument, but public virtue. If Africa is to realize democratic stability, national cohesion, justice, and human flourishing, its society must be built upon must not be built upon religious supremacy, but upon equal citizenship, constitutional democracy, freedom of religion or belief, and the God-given dignity of every human being. Only then will Africa move towards both the Africa we want and the Africa God wants. Thank you for listening. Again, Professor Haynes, thanks for bringing us to this conversation.
Thank you so much, Prof. Agang, for such a wonderful response. In fact, I'm impressed that you were able to give the response within the allocated time. We're very grateful for your time, Prof. Haynes. I'll now give the opportunity to our participants online to interact. If you have questions for Prof. Haynes or Prof. Agang, you have the floor now. You can also drop your questions in the chat box and we'll do all to read it. Okay, so we have Prof. Mukhtar Bonza. I don't know if I got your name right, but you have the floor to speak now. Prof. Mukhtar, please go ahead.
I think he's muted.
Let's see. Okay, I've asked him to unmute. Prof. Mukhtar, kindly unmute from your end. Okay, I think anyone else who would like to take the floor is open to do that. Okay. Yes, there was a question earlier, but I think Prof. Haynes responded to the question. I don't know if you still want to make it open. So someone is asking, this is from Philemon Ibrahim. How can the understanding of evangelism be differentiated from Christian nationalism, since we are exclusively called the light of the world? Should we consider those who are exclusively not part of this light rule us? Was Jesus not promoting Christian nationalism with such language? So Prof. Agang, Prof. Haynes, I don't know if you'd like to throw more light on that question.
Thank you. I responded in the chat box to the effect. It depends on the motivation for evangelism. And I think Jesus, I'm not a theologian. I think Jesus' goal was to bring about improvements to people's lives in general, not to impose a specific way of life on people. And I think that the difference might be that Christian nationalists would see other religions as malign and would need to be repressed, rather than spreading Christianity as a universal humanitarian faith.
Thank you, Prof. Haynes. Prof. Mukhtar, if you're ready, we can take your question. If not, I think we'll proceed to.
Yes, I think I'm ready.
Okay, sure. Please
Can
go
you
ahead.
hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, I would like to first congratulate the SANE Institute for organizing this very important conversation. I would also like to thank two important resource persons of ours, highly respected professors in this field, Professor Agang and the other professor. Yes, I sent a request that we need, if possible, to have copies of the papers presented. I would just like to add very briefly that we had a sort of comparative study or comment about Christian nationalism and the democracy, either as it affects Nigeria or as it affects Ghana. Fundamentally, as a student of history, not theology, by the way, my little study in the social history of religion and its interface with politics, what essentially we largely see in Nigeria is ethnic nationalism under the garb of either Islam or Christian faith, for that matter. If you take an example of northern Nigeria, where myself and Professor Agang, I believe, come from, one will find that the ethnic minorities are fortunately or unfortunately the religious minority in the same area, in the same region. So hardly one can run away from what a German theologist, Kashfeld, discussed about ethnic nationalism and religion in some part of northeastern Nigeria, especially Adamawa and the rest, where he even contextualized the origin and the foundation of the Christian Association of the North, Christian Association of Nigeria today, was an offshoot of a feeling of a section of northern Nigerian people who were or who happened to be Christians minority as well as ethnic minority in the majority northern region. So fundamentally, my submission is that as possibly in Ghana, where you have or we have the issue of Christian nationalism impacting on democracy and the governance, what we, I think, have in Nigeria, I stand to be corrected, Professor Agang is there, hardly you find a religious nationalism or Christian nationalism devoid of having an ethnic original. If you take the southeastern Nigeria, for example, where you have majority of Igbo tribe, mainly Roman Catholic, mainly Christian, and mainly Igbo, in some cases, northern Christians are persecuted or exposed to violence, not because of religion, but because of the regions they come from and the tribes they represent, not necessarily having religion as a major issue of discourse. So as we dissect rising Christian nationalism in Ghana and its growing impact and influence on governance and administration of democracy, so also the problem we have and the dangers we see in Nigeria is not largely of religion, but mainly of ethnic chauvinism and ethnic nationalism or regional, sentiment. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Prof. Mukhtar, for that wonderful submission. Mr. Emmanuel Tete, you have the floor now.
Yeah, thank you. Can you hear me, please?
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Haynes, and also Prof. Agang for the presentation. And unfortunately, Prof. Haynes, I couldn't hear you quite well, but thankfully, I've already read your book, so I have a benefit of what I would have missed from the audio. After reading about 4 chapters of your book, the first question that comes to mind is the first concern or issue that Prof. Agang raised. How do we differentiate participation, civic participation of people of faith in public law and policy from what you have described as Christian nationalism? Reading your book, I enjoyed the way you try to draw the borders in terms of definition and even making the point that there is also issue of democracy and liberal democracy, and then you would put that of Ghana within the area of liberal democracy, the extent to which Christian nationalism becomes a problem. But again, emphasizing on the term liberal democracy, is it not the case that liberal democracy also makes room for participation of people of all, no faith or ideology? And so how do we draw that line so that we do not interpret or misinterpret or mislabel when people participate in public policy conversations, public law conversation, the fact that they draw on their Christian norms, would that necessarily amount to Christian nationalism? And an example you cited in the book, for instance, has to do with the LGBTQ law. Not necessarily the content, that can be a subject for discussion the other time, but the process, the act of participation of Christians, both individuals and politicians, which you also classify as part of Christian and a certain sort of Christian nationalism. Would that not be unfair to others who participated in the same conversation but with different religious and political ideology? So the baseline is, where do we draw the line to avoid labeling every form of public participation in public policy and law by Christians as Christian nationalism.
Prof. Haynes, would you like to take that?
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. These are excellent questions, and it's something which I needed to engage with. The book is preceded, for those of you who are interested, the book was preceded by a long article in the open access journal called Religions from 2023, which is open access and therefore easily accessible, not behind a paywall. So if you Google Jeffery Haynes, Christian nationalism, and the word religions, you should get the article, and it's a long article from 2023, which engages very much with what Mr. Tetu has just said about how you differentiate, if you like, Christian civic participation from Christian nationalism. Yes, my starting premise for the article and for the book was that the two are indeed very different, and of course there are many politicians, many NGOs, many national organizations in Ghana which are motivated by Christianity. They're by no means not all Christian nationalists. Christian nationalism is differentiated from what one might call Christian civic participation by the methods used to engage in the public realm and the goals sought. The difference between a Christian participating in the public realm, let's say politically, is that they bring their personal values, which are molded on Christianity, into how they approach issues of national significance. But they bring those private views which underlines their private and public role in politics and society. The difference between that and Christian nationalism is that Christian nationalism is an ideology which seeks to pursue a goal of what I'm calling a Christianized state. So the average person who's a Christian who engages in public life in Ghana isn't looking towards a Christian state, Christianized state. Christian nationalists want to see a state in Ghana which has greater prominence for Christianity than for other religions. So it's a question of how you express your Christianity in the public realm. Do you do it via a set of personal beliefs, or do you do it via a public ideology with a specific worldview and goal? That, I think, is how I would differentiate between Christian civic participation in general, Christian nationalism specifically. The second issue was, how do you identify Christian nationalism when it's in action? Because, of course, the 1992 Constitution of Ghana does not allow political parties based on ethnicity or religion. So the easiest way to be Christian nationalist publicly, perhaps, and to pursue political goals is to tie yourself to a political party. It can't be done in Ghana. It is done in America. So Christian nationalism in America is tied very much to Donald Trump's Republican Party. And I think one way of assessing Christian nationalism's impact and input into Ghanaian politics is how it implicitly or sometimes explicitly denigrates other faiths and those of no faiths. Christians who engage in the public realm in Ghana do not denigrate other faiths. They wear their Christianity on their sleeve, but they don't wear it in such a way that it undermines the rights of other Ghanaians who are not Christian. That's another difference between Christian nationalism and civic participation of Christians in the public. And third and finally, Mr. Tete raised the issue of LGBTQ, and I absolutely accept that the position of LGBTQ in Ghana is nothing much to do with Christian nationalism. What I would suggest, however, is that Christian nationalists have weaponized the issue to bring it to the current position which we now see. And it's specifically from 2019, when there was an attempt to open a LGBTQ information center in Accra, which was broken up by the police. And this brought the Christian right from America into the conversation in a big way. And they were the ones that financed and gave the ideological motivation for a contemporaneous conference in Ghana, which, if you like, was the starting point for the 2021 bill, which was then, as you know, not seen through during the last presidency, reintroduced in 2024. Just a couple of weeks ago, the bill was passed with just 32 parliamentarians. So LGBTQ is linked to Christian nationalism in the way that it became weaponized in Ghana more generally, beyond the Christian community. And I'm suggesting it's due to the direct input of American Christian right organizations and individuals. Now, I say this because Ghana has had a law since the colonial days about homosexuality, criminalized it. But it was never made a prominent issue until recently. It was something which was on the statute books, but Ghanaians, being generally tolerant people, if you like, shrug their shoulders and say, well, hey, these people are amongst us. We don't particularly like it. We don't condone it, but hey, everyone's got the right to live. The Christian nationalists have weaponized something else, have weaponized an anti-LGBTQ feeling, which has led to the current position in Ghana, whereby it's become perhaps the most controversial and divisive issue that the country has faced in many years. So that would be my response. Thank you so much for those questions. They are very good, and for me, heart-searching questions, which I had to engage with very, very much in the preparation of the 2023 article on this topic and the 2025 book, which I'm referring to today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Prof. Haynes, for that response. I see a hand here, which I suspect is Prof. Azuma. So I'll give you the platform to speak.
Yes, thank you. It's me indeed. I wanted to ask a question to Prof. Haynes also regarding Christian nationalism. When you look at the word, the nationalism, and what you describe in your book, to what extent does personal views of individual Christians, no matter how highly placed they are, how does that translate into Christian nationalism, which could also be understood as a national program, party, platform, seeking a national kind of agenda and driving a national agenda? Does what you describe in your book, some of the views, most of which are personal views, does it translate into a national program, coordinated program of Christians in Ghana seeking to transform the political landscape into a Christian one? Or these are just the usual individual sermons or views expressed disparately without any coordinated platform?
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's a very good question as well. I don't claim in the book that there's a coordinated platform. I don't claim there's a coordinated program. I do claim that there is what one might call a network, an informal network of, and I name them in the book if you're interested, people I see as prominent Christian nationalists who are united in a strong desire to see a Christianized polity in Ghana. These are not by any means necessarily all professionally religious people. These are not necessarily pastors or other Christian professionals in that regard. They can be also people who are politicians, who are head of NGOs and so on. Now, whether this amounts to a coordinated program or a coordinated group is open to question. It depends what we mean by coordinated, because prominent people in Ghana, as you will know, are intimately connected in various ways, professionally, personally, socially. It doesn't require, in my view, something like a political party or a political movement or some kind of social movement in order to coordinate how a goal is pursued. So I think there is kind of a, if you like, an implied or implicit movement, not at the level of the ordinary Ghanaians, but at the level of the elites. Christian nationalism in Ghana is an elite issue. I mean, most ordinary Ghanaians would not have a clue what I will be talking about today, Christian nationalism. They would not identify anything that I've said with their ordinary lives. But for me, the point is that in Ghana, it's top-down pressures, top-down impacts, which are what enables Christian nationalism to have a prominence. Not that it's a sort of a national movement or something like this. And so to a considerable extent, I would see a coordination, an informal coordination of ideas, which coalesce in the three topics that I mentioned in the talk: in the national cathedral, in interfaith relations, in the LGBTQ plus issue. The same people share the same views on the same topics, is what I'm saying. And they have every right to express their views. I'm not suggesting that they should be curtailed. What they've been able to do quite successfully over the last decade or more is to influence political elites. And Kufuor without question. Now, the President Mahama, the current president, is somewhat different, I think. He is somebody who has not, in my view, expressed Christian nationalist views. He hasn't agreed with the continuity of the National Cathedral. He certainly wouldn't agree with an undermining of interfaith relations, and he's certainly quite equivocal about the LGBTQ plus issue. So I'm not suggesting that every prominent position, including the politician, including the president, are Christian nationalists. But I would suggest that there is an attempt and a relative success in imposing or encouraging Christian nationalist views amongst the political elite. One only has to think about a politician like Sam George, for example, who I would label a Christian nationalist without question, who has become very influential in recent times. I could name more names if you like. So it's not so much a coordinated network with a program like Project 2025 in the US, but it's a group of individuals with strong views who are able to get those views into the public realm and influence those in power by personal relations and, to some extent, professional relations. I don't know if that answers your question, Dr. Zuma, but that's how I would seek to respond to it.
Yeah, thank you. That's very helpful. That's very helpful. I think you've answered my question, because I had the follow-up that if you look at someone like even former President Akufo-Addo, whose policy was a national cathedral that you talked about, even though he had individuals in his government that can be described as Christian nationalists, that their party had a Muslim as the vice president. And as you rightly said, someone like John Mahama, who would not subscribe to Christian nationalist views, has very strong, vociferous individuals in his party who can be labeled Christian nationalists. And so I'm just talking about it because there's no proper coordination. And Ghanaians tend to be very pragmatic. Even some George, when it comes to choosing between his Christian nationalist views and his political gains, party political gains, he will jump the ship quickly to become a regular politician to win votes. And that's how these politicians are. But thank you. You've addressed your question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Prof, and to Prof. Haynes for the response. We have a comment and a question in the chat box from Mr. Haruna Mukhtar. He says, thank you, Prof. Haynes, for your presentation. I'm fascinated to hear a non-African perspective on interfaith relations in Ghana. However, just wondering, since interfaith relations is deeply rooted among average Muslims and Christians in the marketplace or multi-faith families, how far can Christian nationalism among elite group affect interfaith relations in a very significant way?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Professor. I think I answered some of that question in my last comments. And I think that the way that interfaith relations can be affected, and I think undermined, is by the prominence of Christian nationalist ideas in the public realm, but specifically via what I would call a rather malign evangelization, which it's not necessarily very new, but it's something which has been in Ghana for a while, which is drawing on what I would see as Christian right representatives to encourage a certain type of evangelization via, for example, the Ghana Evangelism Committee, which regularly invites Christian, those I would say as Christian nationalists, to speak at events and to project the view that non-Christian religions in Ghana are not worthy, they are not equal, they are not to be seen as in the same position of Christianity. So I think that's one particular way in which interfaith relations can be undermined in Ghana by an aggressive proselytization which impacts upon interfaith relations by undermining Ghana's hitherto excellent relations of tolerance and live and let live. I mean, you know, Ghanaians can be as intolerant as British people like me, but it's a question of live and let live, and that's what is undermined by Christian nationalists whose belief in live and let live, as I'm calling it, is not as great as most ordinary Ghanaians is. And I think that's a danger. It's also in a situation where there is perceived jihadi threat from the north in Ghana right now, and it tends to build a kind of suspicion of Islam, which wasn't there in the past. And I'm suggesting that Christian nationalism is the motor for that particular undermining of hitherto very good interfaith relations in Ghana. I'm not saying by any means that it's in a crucially bad position or anything like that, but I am saying that there's a potential, at least, for an undermining of good, tolerant relations in Ghana. And that isn't just my view, it's shared among prominent Muslims that I've spoken to, who tend to be below the radar. They don't tend to come out publicly and say they have a fear, because they realize, Muslims realize in Ghana, that they're a minority religion which can be seen as under threat under certain circumstances. So that's my position on that particular issue.
Thank you, Prof. Haynes. Prof. Agang, this question is directed at you from Mr. Emmanuel Tete. It says, how can Christians engage in public theology without sliding into Christian nationalism?
Okay, thank you very much for that question. How can Christian engage in public theology without sliding into Christian nationalism?
Yes.
Perhaps if you listen to my response, African public theology, the focus is on building the character that will fight corruption, injustice, discrimination, and and all the vices that Africa is struggling with in spite of the growth of religion. Now, your question has also given me the opportunity to say that, what Prof. Haynes is bringing to us is that these politicians can use religious language to cover up their excesses, moral excesses. Just because we are talking about, prayer, cathedral, and all of that, and then corruption is increasing and all of that. People are suffering, poverty is increasing, giving room to the facilitation of recruits into violence, insecurity in the country. So public theology is saying, no, that is not what we want. We want you as a Muslim, as a Christian, as a traditionalist, take your character of honesty, your character of justice, your character of trustworthiness, truthfulness, bring it to public life and build a society where every human being can flourish. That is the point for us.
Thank you, Prof. Agang. We have a few questions from our Facebook page. I'd like to just read that out. Any of you can take it. This is from Dr. Kwashi. He says, thanks to our speakers, Christian nationalism has been linked to liberal democracy. Any comments on the view that democracy from the West is part of the problem and that what Africa needs is an Africa-rooted governance system that fosters traditional values such as unity, a sense of belonging, and collective destiny. Values that are undermined by a political party system that promotes divisions of all kinds as well as corruption. And there's another one, given the comments just made about the LGBTQ, does Christian nationalism happen in a vacuum, or is it always generated in reaction to attempts to impose from outside views that are contrary to long existing values, such as in the LGBTQ case?
If I may just briefly respond to both of those before my colleague comes in. I don't think democracy is a Western imposition. I think you'll find that Afrobarometer consistently argues that democracy is Ghanaians' preferred choice. And equally, I'm not aware of any potential African system of governance which might take the place of democracy, which will be more democratic, if you like. So I think at the moment we're stuck with a universal aspiration. Democracy, I think, is a universal aspiration, and I accept that it has its flaws, but I don't think there's any African system which I'm aware of which could replace currently working democracy. On the LGBTQ thing, I think it's wrong to say that pro-LGBTQ views are imposed from outside. I mean, this is a myth that the Christian nationalists and others perpetuate. Many Ghanaians are aware of their families, their friends, their colleagues who are homosexual. That hasn't been imposed from outside. The suggestion is that this is somehow a lifestyle choice, which the West is forcing down the throats of Ghanaians in order for Ghanaians to become westernized or something like this. It's simply not true. Homosexuality is about identity, and people are born with an identity. There is no question in my mind that this can be imposed as a whim from outside. So I think it's as simple as that, really, that homosexuality is an identity which people are born with. It's not to do with Western imposition, and it's something which Ghanaians maybe see things differently, or some Ghanaians see things differently to me. But that's how I see LGBTQ in Ghana, not as imposed from outside, but as an indigenous thing, like everywhere else in the world, which many Ghanaians are unhappy with, but that doesn't take away the fact that it's an indigenous issue rather than one imposed from outside. That's my view.
Thank you. Prof. Agang, if you could
Yeah,
share your thoughts.
just to share something about democracy itself. Democracy is actually a principle of government that was originally formulated by John Wesley and his people. And if you want to get the origin, I mean, the history of how that happened, you can read Michael Walzer's book on the revolutions of the saints. Now, the challenge then was, they had kings. And to be a king, you have to be born into that family. The rest of you are not men, were not born to rule, were not born to be in power. You were born to be subjects for life. So John Wesley came up with the idea of understanding the priesthood of all believers. And his team, decided to argue that, look, if every believer is a priest, so if every believer has the right to power, you don't have to have a dynasty to be part of a dynasty before you can rule, have access to that. That is how democracy was developed. The idea of democracy was developed. Government of the people, by the people, for the people, with the people. So that is the issue. Now, if we come to the other matter of LGQ plus, in Africa, we need to realize that it's an issue that is difficult to even mention. But when we come to the issue of, are they still human beings? That question of whether they are still human beings does not allow us to just say, well, because the law is not there, they should be persecuted. No, they should never be persecuted. No, we just to accept that, yes, they can be what they, the difficulty for us is how do we accept something that we know from the Bible is not right? Of course, there are other things that we know that from the Bible they are not right. We are doing them, like lying, stealing, the corruption is not good from the Bible. But the people who do corruption, we will celebrate them. So, but this aspect, because it has to do with a choice, it's difficult for us in the Bible Belt, to just swallow this. And so we have to understand where the resistance is coming from. But the encouragement of public theology is that they should still be seen as human beings. They should still be seen as part and parcel of the human community.
Yes, thank you, Prof. Agang. Many thanks to Prof. Haynes for taking time from your very busy schedule to join us this afternoon. We stretched this a little above 3:30, but we're grateful for your time and your wonderful presentation. I'll just quickly hand over to Prof. Azuma to say a few words and then we can wrap up. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for the participations, and we really appreciate this. I think basically, from my understanding, just to say briefly, Christian nationalism, the problem area is that it is tribalism. is a form of tribalism. It is the tribalism part, which is the problematic part. When you want to privilege yours, when you want to dominate others, when you want to take over shared space. This is where the problems are. It's not about you're seeking to influence society, whether you're a Christian or you're Muslim. But when it becomes tribalistic, and that you can only be a Christian to be a head of state, you can only be a Muslim to be a head of state, these are where the problems come. So I think that Christian nationalism, we should think about it as where the tribalism comes in. It becomes dangerous, it becomes unhelpful, because it brings about exclusion, it can lead to persecution, and it can lead to strife. And nobody wants that to happen. So thank you, Prof. Haynes, thank you, Prof. Agang, and thank you to everybody for participating in this lecture. Next month, we are going to look at Muslim nationalism, if there's anything like that, and also have a conversation with regards to this topic as it relates to Islam, also in our Muslim brothers and sisters. Thank you all, and may you all have a wonderful time and evening wherever you are. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Prof. Azuma.